The champagne glasses clinked ked somewhere behind me, laughter bubbling through conversations I wasn't part of. I adjusted my camera settings, scanning the ballroom through the viewfinder for the next shot worth capturing. Thursday nights at the plaza meant wealthy donors pretending to care about whatever cause justified the open bar. My job was to make them look generous. I'd been shooting events like this for 3 years. Ever since I bought my freedom from the corporate studio in Portland that treated photographers like assembly line workers, the pay was inconsistent, but at least the work was mine. Tonight's gig would cover rent with maybe $50 left over. Brooklyn wasn't getting any cheaper. At 11, the event coordinator dismissed me with a distracted wave. I packed my gear quickly, eager to escape before someone asked me to stay late without additional payment. Outside the hotel entrance, I stopped short. The storm had rolled in fast. Water poured from the sky in sheets, turning the street into a river. I hadn't checked the forecast. Stupid. My weather app sat ignored on my phone while I'd been busy framing shots of people who could afford to throw away more money in one evening than I made in 3 months. I pulled my jacket tighter and ran for the parking garage across the street, camera bag clutched against my chest like a shield. The structure was dimly lit, shadows pooling in corners where the overhead fixtures had burned out weeks ago. My Honda Civic waited in the far corner where I'd parked to avoid the valet fee. Halfway there, movement caught my eye. A man in a charcoal suit stumbled near a concrete pillar, one hand pressed against it for balance. He straightened quickly, too quickly, and strode toward a black SUV idling near the elevator bank. His gait was wrong. Controlled, but tense, like someone fighting pain they didn't want to show. Something dark and rectangular tumbled from his pocket as he walked. Leather, expensive looking. It hit the ground with a soft thud that I only heard because I'd stopped moving. "Hey," I called out. "You dropped." The SUV's door slammed. Engine noise echoed through the concrete space as the vehicle pulled away. Taillights disappearing down the exit ramp before I could finish my sentence. The man never looked back. I approached the fallen object slowly, irrationally nervous, despite being alone. It was a wallet. Fine leather worn smooth at the edges from use. The kind of thing that probably cost more than my camera bag. I should have turned it into hotel security. That's what a smart person would have done. Instead, I picked it up and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Just until I got home, I told myself. Just until I could figure out who it belonged to and how to return it. The drive back to Brooklyn took 40 minutes through rain that refused to let up. My apartment building looked worse than usual under the storm's assault. Water streaming from broken gutters and pooling around the foundation. I splashed through puddles to the entrance, juggling my camera bag and keys. Inside my studio apartment, I dropped everything on the kitchen counter and stared at the wallet. Opening someone else's property felt like a violation, but how else was I supposed to return it? The license was first. Julian Fioraldi, age 34. Address in Tribeca that probably meant penthouse money. Dark hair, strong features. Eyes so dark they looked black in the DMV photo. The kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. Not government identification. Behind the license, crisp $100 bills. I counted 20 of them. $2,000 carried casually in a pocket. I left them untouched. Then I found the photograph. It was a Polaroid, faded and creased from years of handling. The image showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with blonde hair caught by sunlight. She wore a yellow dress, the kind with small white flowers embroidered around the collar. In her arms, she clutched a brown teddy bear with one missing eye. I knew that bear. I knew that dress. I knew the wooden fence in the background, and the apple tree just visible at the frame's edge. My hands started shaking. The photo had been taken in my grandmother's backyard. I remembered the day with perfect clarity despite being so young. My mother had made me put on the stupid dress even though I wanted to wear jeans. I'd been crying about leaving the bear behind when we drove home. My father promised we'd come back for it. We never did. 3 weeks after that photo was taken, my parents died in a car accident on Route 26. Brake failure, the police said. Tragic and unavoidable. I was 8 years old. My aunts raised me after that. Both of them gone now. Cancer taking one and a stroke the other. I was alone in the world except for a handful of acquaintances I called friends and a best friend who'd stuck around despite my tendency to cancel plans when work got busy. But this photo, this impossible, unexplainable photograph, why did a stranger named Julian Fioraldi have a picture of me as a child? A picture I'd never known existed. I set the wallet aside and opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Julian Fioraldi's digital footprint was surprisingly small for someone who carried $2,000 in cash. A few articles mentioned him as a businessman attending charity functions. Photos showed him at galas, always in expensive suits, always with a reserved expression that revealed nothing. Then I found the forum posts, a true crime discussion board. Users debating organized crime families in the Northeast. Julian Fioraldi's name appeared in a thread about new generation leadership. The posts were vague, dancing around direct accusations, but the implication was clear. I slammed the laptop shut and pressed my palms against my eyes. This couldn't be real. The photo, the money, the hints of criminal connections. It felt like stumbling into someone else's nightmare. Sleep didn't come. I lay in bed watching shadows shift across the ceiling, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the photo had been bought at an estate sale. Maybe it wasn't even me, just a child who looked similar. Maybe I was losing my mind from stress and too many double shifts. None of those explanations held water. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would return the wallet, keep the photo for now, just until I understood what was happening. If Julian Fioraldi wanted it back, he could explain why he had it first. Friday crawled past in a haze. I went through the motions at a corporate headshot session, adjusting lights and forcing smiles while my mind spun in circles. Around noon, I called my Saturday client and canceled, claiming a stomach bug. The lie came easily. The guilt came harder when I thought about the lost income. Lunch with Vanessa at our usual cafe near Prospect Park. She ordered a quinoa bowl and studied me across the table with narrowed eyes. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. "What's wrong?" "Just tired." I pushed lettuce around my plate. "Work's been busy." "You're a terrible liar, Haley." She set down her fork. "Did something happen?" "Nothing I can explain right now." I met her gaze. "But I'm okay. I promise." She didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. We'd been friends since college, long enough that she knew when to push and when to give me space. Today, she chose space. I got back to my apartment around 3 and found the SUV. Black-tinted windows idling at the curb directly in front of my building. Same make and model as the one from last night, though I couldn't be certain it was the same vehicle. My stomach dropped. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, older than Julian, maybe 40, with silver threading through dark hair. He wore a dark suit and moved with the economical grace of someone who'd spent time in the military, or worse, Miss Turner. His voice was professionally neutral. "My name is Anthony Caruso. I work for Mr. Fioraldi. He'd like to thank you personally for finding his wallet. Would you mind coming with me?" Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I stood frozen on the sidewalk, camera bag heavy on my shoulder. "The money's all there," I said finally. "I didn't take anything. Mr. Fioraldi wouldn't expect you to." Anthony gestured to the SUV's back door. "This won't take long. I promise you're in no danger." The rational part of my brain listed all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Getting into a vehicle with a stranger who worked for a possible criminal. Going somewhere unknown without telling anyone where I'd be. Every true crime podcast I'd ever listened to had covered exactly this scenario. But I thought about the photo tucked in my jacket pocket, the questions that had kept me awake all night. If I walked away now, I'd never get answers. "Fine," I said, "but I'm texting my friend your license plate number and a description of you. If I don't check in with her in 2 hours, she's calling the police." "Of course." Anthony's expression didn't change. "That's very sensible." I sent the text to Vanessa with shaking hands. She responded immediately with 3 question marks and a threat to show up with a baseball bat if needed. Then I climbed into the SUV's back seat. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Anthony drove smoothly through Brooklyn traffic, heading toward Manhattan. We crossed the bridge in silence, skyline emerging through the windshield like a promise or a threat. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a building in Tribeca. Glass and steel, the kind of place where monthly fees probably exceeded my annual income. Anthony parked in the underground garage and led me to a private elevator. "Penthouse," he said simply, pressing the button. The ride up felt like ascending through layers of a world I didn't belong in. Corporate lobbies gave way to residential floors, then luxury, then something beyond that. The elevator opened directly into an apartment that occupied the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Manhattan spread out like a kingdom. Minimalist furniture, expensive art, everything perfectly arranged. A man stood by the windows, back to the elevator. Dark suit different from last night, but equally expensive. When he turned, I recognized him from the license photo, Julian Fioraldi. But the picture hadn't captured the intensity of his actual presence. 6 foot plus, broad shoulders, face that managed to be both classically handsome and slightly dangerous. Those dark eyes fixed on me with an attention that made my stomach flip. "Miss Turner." His voice was deeper than I'd expected, rough around the edges despite the polished appearance. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure I had a choice." I stayed near the elevator, ready to bolt. "Anthony mentioned you wanted to thank me for the wallet." Julian crossed the space between us with measured steps. "I did, but I suspect that's not why you agreed to come." "The photograph." I pulled it from my pocket, held it up. "Why do you have a picture of me as a child? A picture I've never seen before." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, though carefully controlled. He took the Polaroid gently, studying it like he'd done 1,000 times before. "I've had this for 19 years. My brother gave it to me before he died. He made me promise to keep it safe." "Your brother?" I didn't understand. "Who was your brother? How did he know me?" "Dante Fioraldi. He was 22 when he was killed. The name meant nothing to me." I shook my head, confused and increasingly nervous. "I've never heard that name. I don't know your brother. I didn't know your family." Julian moved to a desk in the corner, opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. He spread photos across the glass surface. All of them showed a younger man, dark-haired like Julian but with a softer expression, laughing in some pictures, serious in others, always wearing a Street Michael medallion on a silver chain. The last photo was different. Crime scene documentation. I looked away quickly, stomach churning. "Dante worked for my father," Julian said quietly. "Low-level operations, nothing violent. He disappeared for 3 weeks before we found his body. He'd been executed. Professional, clean, no witnesses. I'm sorry," I managed. "But I still don't understand what this has to do with me." The folder contained more documents. Julian pulled out a property deed, yellowed with age. "Your grandmother's house upstate. The one with the backyard in that photo. The one that was sold 19 years ago." My hands went cold. "How do you know about my grandmother's house?" "Because the man who bought it from your family was using it as a front," Julian said. "He was a mid-level player in a trafficking operation. Dante was investigating him when he died. The investigation was off the books. Dante told my father he'd found something that justified the risk. The day before he was killed, he gave me that photo. He said if anything happened to him, I needed to figure out who the girl was and make sure she was safe." I sank into the nearest chair, legs refusing to hold me. This is insane. My grandmother sold that house to pay for medical bills. It was a normal sale. Normal buyers. Was it? Julian's tone was gentle but insistent. "Did your family meet the buyers? Did they question why someone paid $50,000 over asking price for a rundown property in the middle of nowhere?" I didn't know. I'd been 8 years old. My aunts had handled everything after my parents died. They never mentioned anything suspicious. "My parents," I said slowly. "They died 3 weeks after that photo was taken. Car accident on Route 26. Brake failure." Julian's jaw tightened. "What date?" "August 17th, 1996. He pulled out a laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard, pulled up archived news articles. Then he turned the screen toward me. An article from August 1996. A feature on a series of accidents along Route 26, all involving brake failures. All victims had some connection, however tangential, to property sales in the region. The article suggested faulty parts from a local mechanic. The mechanic had died 2 weeks later. Suicide, allegedly. I stared at the screen, mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "You're saying someone killed my parents? Because of a house sale?" "I'm saying Dante thought there was more to your grandmother's property than anyone realized," Julian said carefully. "And the people using that property for criminal activity had a pattern of eliminating complications. Your parents' deaths might have been coincidence. But Dante didn't believe in coincidences. Neither do I." The apartment suddenly felt too small, air too thin. I stood abruptly, needing space. "This is too much. I came here to return a wallet, not to hear conspiracy theories about my parents' deaths. It's not a theory." Julian closed the laptop. Dante died trying to uncover the truth. The trafficking operation was shut down 6 months after his death, but the people running it were never caught. They disappeared, took their money, and moved on. I kept the photo because I made a promise. I've spent 19 years trying to understand why my brother thought a little girl in a yellow dress mattered enough to die for. And now you show up at a charity event with my wallet. Julian moved closer, and I realized I was shaking. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted this to be a nightmare I could wake up from. But the photo was real. The articles were real. And somewhere in the impossible tangle of events, my childhood tragedy might have been connected to organized crime and a dead man I'd never known. What do you want from me? My voice came out smaller than intended. Nothing. Julian's expression softened slightly. I wanted to meet you, to know you were safe, to understand what Dante saw that made him think you needed protection. But I understand this is overwhelming. Anthony can drive you home. If you want to leave, you can leave. No obligations. No threats. I looked at the photo still in his hand. The girl in the yellow dress, frozen in a moment of innocence before everything fell apart. When was this taken? Do you know? Dante's note said July 28th, 1996. 3 weeks before my parents died. Exactly 3 weeks. What was your brother doing at my grandmother's house? Surveillance. The property had been purchased 2 months earlier by a shell company. Dante was photographing everyone who came and went. He took that picture because he said you looked happy. He wanted to remember that someone innocent still existed in all the corruption he was documenting. I pressed my hands against my eyes, fighting tears. If he knew something bad was going to happen, why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he warn anyone? He tried. Julian's voice held old pain. He went to my father, to other authorities he thought he could trust. No one believed him. The evidence was circumstantial, the connections too vague. By the time he could prove anything, it was too late. For your parents, for himself. The silence stretched between us, heavy with questions neither of us could answer. Outside the windows, the city moved through its normal rhythms. People living ordinary lives without knowing how close they were to the darkness that existed in corners and shadows. I need time, I said finally, to process this, to figure out what I believe. Of course. Julian handed me a card, embossed, expensive. A phone number, nothing else. If you have questions, if you need anything, or if you just want to talk to someone who understands how it feels to lose family to violence you didn't see coming. I took the card, slipped it into my pocket next to the photo I'd decided to keep. Anthony appeared as if summoned, ready to drive me back to Brooklyn. At the elevator, I paused. Your brother, Dante, was he a good person? Julian considered the question seriously. He tried to be. In our world, that's complicated. But yes, I think he was. Better than most of us. Better than me. The elevator descended through layers of luxury back to street level. Anthony drove in silence, respecting whatever processing I was doing. My apartment building looked shabby after the penthouse, but familiar. Safe in ways that had nothing to do with security systems or armed guards. Inside, I sat on my bed and pulled out the photo again. The little girl smiled up at me, unaware that in 3 weeks her world would shatter. Unaware that a stranger with a camera thought she deserved protection. Unaware that 19 years later, his brother would keep a promise that might explain everything or nothing. I called Vanessa. Are you alive? She answered without greeting. Yes. Can you come over? On my way. She arrived 20 minutes later with Thai food and wine. We sat on my floor, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and concern. This is insane, she said finally. You know that, right? Mafia conspiracies and tragic coincidences and mysterious photos. It sounds like a movie. I know. But the photo is real. The articles are real. And my parents are still dead. She was quiet for a moment, picking at pad thai. What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to forget all of it. Throw away the photo, block the number, pretend I never found that wallet. And the other part wants answers. Wants to know if my parents' deaths weren't just bad luck. Wants to understand why a man I never met thought I needed protecting. Vanessa studied me with the same analytical attention she applied to her work in data science. Okay, she said slowly. If you're going to pursue this, we do it carefully. No going off alone. No trusting anyone completely. And definitely no falling for the dangerous mafia guy with the tragic backstory, no matter how well he fills out a suit. I'm not going to fall for him. I'm barely going to see him again. Sure. She raised her wine glass. 'Cause that's definitely how these stories end. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of research and routine. I photographed weddings and corporate events, edited images, paid bills, normal life continuing while questions churned beneath the surface. At night, I dove into archives. News reports from 1,996, property records, anything I could find about the trafficking operation Julian had mentioned. Most leads went nowhere. Files had been sealed or destroyed. Names appeared in one article, then vanished from subsequent coverage. But patterns emerged. A network of properties purchased through shell companies. Accidents that removed potential witnesses. Investigations that stalled or disappeared. And at the edges of it all, mentions of the Fioraldi family. Not as criminals, but as the people who'd eventually disrupted the operation. Julian's father had died 10 years ago. Heart attack, publicly. But forum discussions suggested it hadn't been natural. The family had enemies. People who held grudges over Dante's investigation and its aftermath. I started noticing things. Cars that appeared too often on my street. Faces that seemed familiar from multiple locations. Once, I could have dismissed it as paranoia. Now I knew better. 3 weeks after our first meeting, I called the number on Julian's card. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "About the surveillance you have on me." There was a pause. Then, "It's not surveillance, it's protection." "Same thing from where I'm standing." "Meet me," I said. "Somewhere public. Tomorrow. The coffee shop near Prospect Park at 3. He agreed without argument. The next day, I arrived early, claimed a corner table with a view of the entrance. Vanessa was at the bar, pretending to work on her laptop but actually watching my back. When Julian walked in, heads turned. He dressed more casually than before, dark jeans and a leather jacket, but still commanded attention. He ordered black coffee and joined me at the table. "You noticed the protection team," he said without preamble. "I'm not an idiot. How long have they been there?" "Since the day after you came to the penthouse. The SUV nearly always on my street now. The man in the park who's always reading the same book. The woman at the bodega who started working there the day after I met you." Julian didn't deny it. "After Dante died, my father made enemies. Some of them are still active. When you showed up with that photo, it raised questions. People who know our history might wonder why I'm interested in a photographer from Brooklyn. So I'm in danger because I returned your wallet? No. You're potentially in danger because the same people who killed Dante don't like loose ends. And right now, you're a loose end they don't understand." The coffee tasted bitter in my mouth. I set down the cup carefully. "I want the surveillance stopped. I want my normal life back." Julian leaned forward, intensity in his dark eyes. "I can't do that. Not without knowing you're safe." "Then help me understand." I kept my voice low, aware of other patrons. "Explain what my parents' deaths have to do with an investigation from 19 years ago. Explain why your brother took that photo. Explain what you think I need protection from." "This isn't the place for that conversation. Come back to the penthouse. Bring your friend if you don't feel safe alone. I'll show you everything Dante documented. Everything my family discovered afterward." I looked at Vanessa. She nodded once, closing her laptop. "We'll both come. But if anything feels wrong, we're leaving." "Fair enough." Julian stood, dropped cash on the table for my coffee. "Tomorrow, 7. Bring questions. I'll provide answers." The next evening, Vanessa and I took a lift to Tribeca. She'd dressed professionally, armor against whatever we were walking into. I wore jeans and a simple black sweater, refusing to pretend this was anything but what it was. An interrogation, a demand for truth. Anthony met us in the lobby, led us to the private elevator. Julian was waiting when the doors opened, but this time, the penthouse was different. The dining table was covered in files, photos, documents. A murder board, essentially. Evidence of an investigation that had never officially closed. "This is everything," Julian said, gesturing to the spread. "Dante's original notes. Police reports my father obtained through various channels. Property records, financial documents, witness statements that were never followed up on. It's taken me 19 years to piece it together." Vanessa moved to the table, her analytical mind immediately processing the information. I stayed back, suddenly afraid of what I might find. Your parents bought groceries in town the day before they died, Julian began, pulling out a receipt from a store owned by a man named Richard Morrison. Morrison was a silent partner in the shell company that purchased your grandmother's property. He died 6 months later. Officially, a robbery gone wrong. But no money was taken, just Morrison and any records he might have kept. He pointed to another document, the mechanic who supposedly installed faulty brakes, Thomas Chen. His daughter filed a wrongful death lawsuit claiming her father was murdered, made to look like suicide. The lawsuit was dismissed. The daughter disappeared 3 months later. No one's seen her since. I felt sick. How many people died? At least 15 that we can confirm, more that we suspect. The trafficking operation generated millions annually. They protected it aggressively. When Dante started asking questions, they panicked, started eliminating anyone who might connect the dots. Including my parents? Julian met my eyes. I believe your parents' deaths were meant to look like part of the accident pattern. One more tragic coincidence in a string of bad luck. They died because they'd signed papers on your grandmother's property. Because they could potentially identify the buyers if anyone asked the right questions. But no one asked. I'd been 8 years old. My aunts had been grieving, overwhelmed with suddenly raising a child. The house sale had been the least of their concerns. Did they know? My aunts? Did they ever suspect anything? Julian shook his head. We looked into them thoroughly. They genuinely believed everything was coincidence. They protected you well, Haley, raised you safely, got you through college. They did exactly what good people do when tragedy strikes. Your aunts were never on anyone's radar. The tears came then, hot and angry. I'd spent 19 years believing my parents' deaths were random, meaningless bad luck. Learning they'd been murdered, that their deaths had been calculated and deliberate, changed everything. It made the loss worse, and somehow more bearable at the same time. Vanessa wrapped an arm around me. We can leave if you need to. No. I wiped my eyes roughly. I need to know everything. What happened to the operation? How did it end? Dante's evidence was found after his death, Julian explained, hidden in a storage unit under a false name. My father used it carefully. Couldn't go to the police. They were too compromised. Instead, he leveraged connections, applied pressure, made life expensive and dangerous for everyone involved. The operation collapsed within 6 months. 3 of the main players died. The rest scattered. We recovered some of the money, used it to compensate families where we could. But the people at the very top, the ones who gave the orders, they got away. Vanessa was studying the documents with frightening focus. This shell company, she said, pointing to a corporate filing. The registered agent is listed as Lawrence Associates. That's a known front for the Castellano family. Julian nodded. The Castellanos ran the trafficking operation. They're still active, though their business model has evolved. Less human trafficking, more financial crimes. But they remembered Dante. Remember how close he came to destroying them. And they definitely remember your father, Vanessa added, looking at Julian. These forum posts suggest the Fioraldis and Castellanos have been in a cold war for 2 decades. Which brings us back to your situation, Haley. Julian pulled out recent photographs. These are known Castellano associates. They've been asking questions. About me? About the woman who returned my wallet? About why I might be interested in a photographer with no apparent connection to our world. They're trying to understand the angle. I sat down heavily. This is insane. I returned a wallet. That's all. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. Julian's voice was genuinely apologetic. And if I could undo it, I would. But the moment you walked into that parking garage, you became visible to people who pay attention to patterns. A woman connected to a property their organization once used. Connecting with a Fioraldi after 19 years. To them, that looks like strategy, not coincidence. So what now? Vanessa demanded. She just lives with bodyguards forever? Is that the solution? There are options. Julian pulled out more documents. We can create a paper trail that explains the connection. A commission for a photography project, something legitimate and boring. That might satisfy their curiosity. Or I can reach out to Castellano directly. Explain it was genuine coincidence, negotiate assurances, or, and he hesitated, you can disappear. New identity, new city, financial support to start over. It's not ideal, but it's effective. I will not run. The words came out sharper than intended. I will not let criminals dictate my life. I've already lost my parents, my aunts, my childhood innocence. I'm not losing my name and my work, too. Then we do this carefully. Julian's expression was calculating, strategic. The photography commission is real. I'll hire you legitimately for a project. Corporate work, well paid, documented. It gives you a reason to be in my orbit that has nothing to do with the past. Meanwhile, my people maintain discreet protection. You live your life, build your career. But you're aware and careful. What kind of project? Something legitimate enough to withstand scrutiny. Corporate photography for my businesses. You're talented. Your portfolio is strong. It's not charity. Then why are you really doing this? I held his gaze. Because of a promise to a dead brother? Or because you feel guilty that my parents might have died because of your family's war? Both. He didn't flinch from the question. Dante made me promise to protect the girl in that photo if I ever found her. I intend to keep that promise. But yes, I also feel responsible. My family's investigation triggered a response that killed innocent people. I can't fix the past, but I can prevent more damage now. Over the next hour, we hammered out details. A legitimate contract for a year-long photography project documenting Julian's various business ventures. The pay was generous, but not suspiciously so. The work was real, time-consuming, professional. To anyone investigating, it would explain why I spent time in Julian's orbit. Vanessa reviewed every document with suspicious precision. When we finally left, she was quiet until we reached the street. "This is dangerous," she said finally. "Not just the Castellano thing. Him. You do realize what you're getting into? A business arrangement. Nothing more." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. But she didn't argue. Work began the following week. I photographed Julian's office complex, his restaurant investments, the legitimate fronts that funded whatever happened in the shadows. He was a surprisingly good subject, comfortable in front of the camera despite obvious control over what image he projected. We fell into a routine. Weekly shoots, monthly reviews. He paid promptly, treated me professionally. But underneath the business relationship, something else was building. Conversations that went beyond logistics. Julian asking about my work, my past, my dreams. Me learning about him in careful increments. The pressure of running an organization he'd inherited too young. The weight of Dante's death still shaping every decision. 3 months in, we were reviewing photos in his office when I asked the question that had been building. "Do you ever think about getting out?" "Out of what?" "This life. The organization, the constant threat. The Cold War with families like the Castellanos." He was quiet for a long moment. "Every day. But it's not that simple. I'm responsible for 200 families who depend on our businesses for income. I'm the target that keeps others safe. And the moment I show weakness or uncertainty, someone will move against us. That's no way to live. It's the only way I know." He met my eyes. "This is who I am, Haley. I can't change my past any more than you can change yours. But I can choose how I move forward. And right now, that means keeping promises. Even ones made to a dead man you barely remember. Especially those." He pulled out the photo, the original Polaroid I'd found in his wallet. "I look at this every day. Remind myself that protecting someone innocent matters more than business strategies or territorial disputes. You were 8 years old in this picture, and someone wanted you dead just for existing at the wrong time. That's unforgivable." I stared at the little girl in the yellow dress. She looked so happy, so completely unaware of what was coming. "How do you live with all this?" I asked. "Knowing what your world costs?" Carefully, he put the photo away. "I don't pretend to be a good man. I run businesses that exist in legal gray areas. I've made decisions that hurt people. But I also draw lines. We don't traffic humans anymore. We don't target families. And we pay our debts, even ones owed to people we've never met. Is that enough? To balance the scale? No, but it's what I have." Around month 4, the threats changed. Nothing overt, just subtle shifts. Anthony reported increased Castellano surveillance. A photographer was approached at an event I'd worked, asked pointed questions about me and Julian. Someone tried to hack my email. The protection team intercepted it, but the message was clear. Someone wanted to know what I knew. Julian suggested I move temporarily. somewhere more secure until things cooled down. I refused. I'd built a life in Brooklyn, built a career on my own terms. I wouldn't give that up because dangerous men were playing power games, but I did accept the upgraded security system for my apartment, and the panic button Anthony installed in my camera bag, and the new phone with encrypted messaging, small concessions that let me pretend my life was still normal. Vanessa was less sanguine about the whole situation. She showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening, anger evident in her rigid posture. "You're being stupid," she said without preamble. "The contract's up in 8 months. You could walk away, take the money, start fresh somewhere else. And instead you're digging in deeper. I'm not walking away from my life because criminals find me inconvenient. That's not courage. That's stubbornness. And it's going to get you killed." Maybe. I met her fierce gaze. But I'm tired of losing things, Vanessa. Tired of letting other people's violence dictate my choices. My parents died because bad men decided they were in the way. I won't let that define the rest of my existence. "And what about Julian?" she demanded. "Because I see how you look at him, how he looks at you. This stopped being just business months ago, and you know it." I didn't have a good answer for that, because she was right. Somewhere between photography sessions and late-night conversations, between shared grief over people we'd lost and recognition of similar damage, something had shifted. I was falling for a man who lived in a world I didn't understand and couldn't quite condemn. "If you do this," Vanessa said more gently, "if you let yourself care about him, you can't be naive about what that means. You'll be choosing his world. All the danger, all the compromises, all the moral ambiguity. Are you ready for that? I don't know. But I'm tired of running from things that scare me." The next event changed everything. A gallery opening in Chelsea for a charity Julian supported. Public, well-attended, supposedly safe. I was there professionally, documenting the evening. Julian worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and making small talk. I was setting up for a group shot when I saw him. A man in an expensive suit, but wrong. His stance was too alert, eyes scanning constantly. When he met my gaze, something cold moved through his expression. Anthony saw it too. He materialized at my side, spoke quietly into his radio. "Mr. Fioraldi needs to leave. Now." "What's happening?" "The man in the gray suit by the bar. Known Castellano enforcer. He's not here for the art." Anthony was already moving me toward the exit. Julian appeared from another direction, face tightly controlled. We left together through a service entrance, Anthony and 2 other guards forming a protective barrier. The SUV was waiting. Inside, Julian made calls in rapid Italian. His tone was sharp, angry. When he finished, he looked at me. "You're coming to the penthouse until we sort this out." I didn't argue. Something in his voice said this wasn't negotiable. The penthouse felt different now. Less like a showcase, more like a fortress. Anthony stationed guards, activated additional security protocols. Julian poured us both whiskey. I didn't typically drink brown liquor, but tonight felt like an exception. "They're escalating," he said finally. "That wasn't coincidence. They wanted me to see him. Wanted me to know they're watching. A message about me? About us." He set down his glass. "The Castellanos want to know why I'm protecting you. They've connected you to the property their operation used. They think you have information or leverage. Do I? Not that they'd care about. But perception matters more than truth in this world. So what happens now?" Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to where I sat, crouched down so we were eye level. "I can end this. Negotiate a meeting with Castellano. Explain the truth. Offer assurances. They might accept it, might even apologize for the confusion. But there's a risk they won't. That they'll see explanation as weakness and push harder. The alternative? I keep you protected. Visible enough that targeting you looks like attacking me directly. Make it clear that you're under my family's shield, off limits regardless of past connections. That's starting a war. Possibly." He met my eyes, but I meant what I said about keeping Dante's promise, about protecting you, and somewhere in the last 4 months, that stopped being just about a promise to a dead brother. My breath caught. "Julian, don't make this about feelings when it's really about strategy. It's both." His voice was rough with honesty. "Strategy says protecting you sends the right message about boundaries. But I'm not doing this just because it's strategic. I'm doing it because the thought of something happening to you makes me want to burn the whole world down. And that's terrifying, because I can't afford feelings like that. Not in my position. I pressed my forehead against his. This is insane. We barely know each other. I know you lost your parents to violence you didn't understand. I know you photograph moments other people overlook because you don't take beauty for granted. I know you're stubborn and brave and so determined to live life on your terms that you'll stand up to criminals rather than hide. That's enough. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. Like something that had been building since the moment I'd found his wallet in a parking garage. When we finally broke apart, breathless, I said, I need to think about this. About us. About what I'm willing to risk. Take your time. He stood, offering me his hand. Guest room is down the hall. You're safe here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. I spent the night in Julian's guest room, staring at ceiling and trying to organize my thoughts. My parents had died because they'd unknowingly intersected with criminal enterprise. I'd spent 19 years thinking their deaths were random. Now I knew the truth, and I was choosing to get involved with a man whose world operated on the same violent principles. Was I being brave or stupid? Was I honoring my parents' memory or betraying it? By morning, I'd decided. I found Julian in his office, already dressed for the day in a dark suit. He looked up when I entered, expression carefully neutral. I'm staying, I said without preamble. In Brooklyn, in the contract, in whatever this is between us. But I need rules. He leaned back in his chair. I'm listening. First, honesty. No protecting me by keeping me ignorant. If there's a threat, I need to know. If your business does something that impacts my safety, I need to know. Second, my career stays mine. The photography project is legitimate, but it doesn't own me. I take other jobs, maintain other clients, keep my independence. Third, I set my own boundaries. I'm not naive about your world, but I won't participate in anything illegal. You keep that part of your life separate from me. Fair? More than fair. Julian stood, crossed to where I waited. Anything else? Yes. I met his intense gaze. You said you look at that photo every day as a reminder. I want you to put it in a frame with a picture of me now. So you remember I'm not just a promise to keep. I'm a person you're choosing. Deal. His smile was slight but genuine. But I get to choose the current photo, something that captures who you really are. We commissioned the frame together, 2 photos side by side. The little girl in the yellow dress, and a candid shot Julian had taken on his phone during one of our late-night conversations. In the current photo, I'm laughing at something he'd said, completely unguarded. It hung in his office, visible from his desk, a reminder of the past and a promise about the future. The next 6 months were an education in existing between worlds. I maintained my photography business, shooting weddings and events, but I also spent time in Julian's orbit, learning the careful dance of his public persona versus private reality. Vanessa struggled with it. She'd meet us for coffee, study Julian with analytical suspicion, then grill me afterward about red flags and warning signs. But she also saw how he treated me, with respect and genuine care, never possessive or controlling, how his protection team kept me safe without making me feel trapped. Slowly, grudgingly, she admitted he might not be entirely terrible. The Castellano situation resolved through negotiation. Julian met with their current head, a woman named Victoria who'd inherited control after her father's death. They reached an understanding. I was off limits, explained as a legitimate business connection. In exchange, Julian made concessions on territory disputes I didn't fully understand. The fragile peace held. My life developed a strange rhythm. Days spent capturing beauty through my camera lens. Evenings split between my Brooklyn apartment and Julian's penthouse. Navigating the contradiction of dating someone whose business I couldn't examine too closely while also demanding honesty about threats to my safety. Julian was surprisingly good at balancing those demands. He never lied, but he also didn't volunteer information unnecessarily. When his business took him places I couldn't follow, he said so directly. When decisions he made might impact my safety, he explained them fully. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And after a lifetime of not knowing why my parents had died, honesty mattered more than comfort. Around month 9, we were in the Catskills at a house Julian owned. Supposedly a weekend retreat, actually a secure location for meetings he didn't want in the city. I was photographing the fall colors, capturing leaves that seemed impossibly bright against gray sky. Julian found me at the edge of the property, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and orange. I've been thinking about the foundation, he said without preamble. The one Dante wanted to create before he died. For families affected by trafficking and organized crime. I turned to look at him. He'd mentioned it before, in passing. A dream his brother never got to realize. What about it? I want to fund it, properly. Use money recovered from the Castellano operation and contributions from our legitimate businesses. Create something that actually helps people. But I want you involved. Your eye for stories, your understanding of what it's like to be on the receiving end of violence. Would you consider it? I thought about the little girl in the yellow dress. About my parents who'd died for nothing but being in the wrong place. About all the other families who'd lost people to violence they didn't understand and couldn't prevent. Yes, I said. But not as therapy or atonement. If we do this, we do it right. Professionally, effectively. Making real impact, not just throwing money at guilt. Agreed. He wrapped arms around me from behind, both of us watching the sun disappear behind mountains. I don't know if this balances anything, Haley, but it's something. That's all any of us can do, I replied. Take the damage we've survived and try to prevent it happening to someone else, even if it doesn't fix the past. The foundation launched 6 months later, properly funded, professionally managed. I ran the photography project, documenting families affected by violence, telling stories that news cycles forgot. I'd spent September photographing children in victim services programs, capturing resilience that shouldn't have been necessary but existed anyway. The foundation gave me access to subjects I'd never have met otherwise. Kids like I'd been trying to understand why the world had turned cruel. Some wanted their photos taken. Others just wanted someone to listen. I did both. Vanessa still hadn't completely forgiven me for the weeks of lies, but we were rebuilding. Coffee every Sunday, her screening Julian with protective suspicion that made me love her more. She'd met him twice, brief encounters where she assessed him like a subject under scientific observation. He's intense, she'd said after the second meeting, and clearly dangerous, but he looks at you like you're the only real thing in his world. That's dramatic even for you. I call it like I see it. Just promise me if he ever hurts you, I get to key his car before you disappear into witness protection or whatever. Deal. My apartment in Brooklyn had become home again. Though the upgraded security system reminded me daily that normal was relative, Julian's men maintained discreet surveillance, enough to respond quickly without making me feel imprisoned. I'd grown used to the shadow presence, even grateful for it on nights when old nightmares surfaced. The nightmares came less frequently now. Therapy helped. Weekly sessions with Dr. Wanalino. Reeves, who specialized in trauma and didn't flinch when I mentioned cartels and gunfire. She helped me understand that survival wasn't the same as healing. The carrying fear didn't make me weak. You're allowed to be angry, she'd said during our last session about what was stolen from you, about having to grow up too fast, about being pulled into violence you didn't choose. I'm more tired than angry. Tired of looking over my shoulder, of calculating risk in every decision. That's normal given what you've experienced. But Haley, you're also building something new. The foundation, your relationship, the documentary work. Those are choices moving you forward, not just reactions to the past. She was right. For the first time since my parents died, I felt like I was living instead of just surviving. The documentary project led me back to my grandmother's property upstate. The house had been sold years ago, but the new owners allowed me access to photograph the backyard. The same fence, the same apple tree, older but still standing. I brought my camera and the courage I'd been gathering for weeks. Set up the tripod in the exact spot where someone had photographed me at 8 years old in that yellow dress. This time I wore jeans and a charcoal sweater, hair loose, expression steady rather than confused. The self-timer clicked. I held position for 10 frames, capturing something I couldn't quite name. Not replacement of the past. Acknowledgement that the girl in the yellow dress had survived, had grown, had found her way back to this place with scars, but also strength. I showed Julian the photos that evening at his Tribeca penthouse. He'd moved back after security upgrades, though he spent most weekends at my place or the Catskills house. He studied the images in silence, the old Polaroid beside my laptop for comparison. The yellow dress and the contemporary portrait separated by 19 years and everything that had happened between. You're planning to exhibit these, he said finally, as part of a larger series. Before and after, trauma and survival. The children we were and the people we became. It's powerful work, Haley. Important. I saved the files and closed my laptop. I want to frame both photos for your office. The original Polaroid your brother gave you, and this new one side by side. Why my office? Because you kept that photo safe for 19 years when you didn't have to. Because you saw a child who deserved answers, not a problem to be solved. Because sometimes secrets we carry aren't burdens, they're bridges to people we were always meant to meet. Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability breaking through control. He pulled me close, pressed his forehead against mine. I was 15 when Dante died. Spent 19 years wondering why he thought that photo mattered enough to make me promise to keep it safe. Now I know. Do you regret it? Everything that happened? I regret the danger. I regret not moving faster, being smarter, protecting you better. But meeting you, learning your story, watching you transform tragedy into purpose. He pulled back enough to meet my eyes that I'll never regret. We had the photos framed together, museum quality side by side in his office where he'd see them daily. The girl in the yellow dress who'd lost everything, and the woman who'd survived to build something new. Not redemption, not forgetting, just proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. 6 months after everything began, I stood in Julian's office looking at those frames while he took a call. Anthony was there too, reporting on business. I still chose not to understand completely. The operation had changed, shifted toward less violent revenue streams, but it remained what it was. I'd made peace with dating a man whose world operated outside conventional morality. The foundation approved its first 12 grants today, I told them when Julian ended his call. Kids in 5 different states. Youngest is 6, oldest is 17. That's good work, Anthony said. Real impact. My parents would have liked knowing their deaths led to something beyond tragedy. That the property criminals used for 19 years is now funding recovery for other victims. Julian crossed to where I stood, wrapped arms around me from behind. Your parents would be proud of who you became despite everything. So would your aunts. I leaned into him, studying the photos. Sometimes I wonder what they'd think about all this. About you? About the choices I've made? And what conclusion do you reach? That they raised me to survive, to be practical and self-sufficient and careful. But they also taught me that family isn't always blood. That protecting people you love matters more than following rules. And that sometimes the safest choice is trusting dangerous people who prove themselves when it counts. That's a generous interpretation. It's the truth. I turned in his arms. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with, even if it doesn't make logical sense to anyone else. Outside, the city spread beneath us. Millions of lives intersecting in patterns too complex to map. Somewhere in that chaos, other children were losing parents. Other people were making impossible choices. Other secrets were being kept that would take years to understand. But in this moment, in this space, the girl in the yellow dress and the woman she'd become existed side by side, not separate, continuous proof that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about finding meaning in the scars, purpose in the pain, and sometimes unexpectedly love in the unlikeliest places. Julian kissed the top of my head. Ready to go home? Which home? Whichever one feels right tonight. I smiled against his chest. Brooklyn, I promised Vanessa Sunday brunch and she's still convinced you're secretly a supervillain. I appreciate her commitment to your well-being. She just wants me happy. And are you happy? I considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, I'd been hiding from cartels, fighting for survival, terrified of every shadow. Now I was building foundations, creating art, loving someone who saw past my defenses to the person I'd been afraid to become. Getting there, I said, one careful step at a time. And maybe that was all any of us could do. Take the broken pieces of our pasts, the scars that marked us, the secrets we carried, and build something new. Not perfect, not safe, but real and ours and worth fighting to protect.